Watchers. This is episode 99. I'm joined by Nick and Cody from the website. How's it going, guys?
Doing good.
Aloha, doing good.
And today we will be talking with Chuck Austen and Patrick Olliffe. They recently, well, this week, they had a new creator-owned series, Edgeworld, which is a ComiXology original that released, and so they're here to kind of talk to us about it. So let's go ahead and find out some more about this.
Well, Chuck, do you want to lead this off as the elder statesman / writer / guy that talks better than me thing?
Sure, I guess. Age before beauty and all that. Yeah. What would you like? What would you guys want me to talk about? Just to sort of generally what the series is, or?
Yeah, definitely. If you could kind of give us a start on, how did this get started? Edgeworld #1, like how did it come to existence? And it finally released this week. I'm sure y'all have been working on it for quite some time. If you could give us some background on kind of how it came to be.
And released as the #1 new release this week.
Wow.
So hot out of the gate.
There you go.
Yeah, it was weird. That's like a strange place for me to be. Well, I mean, Pat and I have known each other for a long time, but I think, like he was saying, we haven't really lived near each other, so it's not like we've hung out or anything. But we've always had like minds, and we've tried many times to work together on different projects. And he actually had reached a point where he wanted to do something that was more creator owned, because he'd never done that before. And so he called me up and asked if we had a project that we had worked on years ago that we had pitched around that nobody was interested in. It was called I Am Vengeance. And it was, I just found that piece that you did. Yeah. It's so gorgeous. But we pitched it around. Nobody was interested in doing it. So he said, maybe we should try self-publishing or try something different. And so we were just sort of feeling the concept out. And we tried again. We put together another pitch package. We kind of updated it from where it had been before. Still couldn't get anybody really interested. And we were still considering the self-publishing thing. When I said, maybe it's just not the right time for this project. I get this other thing that's been kind of laying around for a while. You want to talk about it? I don't really have it. It's not concrete or anything. I said, it's kind of like a Western town in space. Mm-hmm. And Pat goes, oh, that sounds cool. So we just started batting ideas back and forth and sending stuff to each other. And before we knew it, he was doing, full color. That first cover was just a poster piece that he did for fun because we were having a good time with this whole thing. And I had written like 5 scripts just to kind of figure out where we were going. And I was driving him crazy because I kept writing something and I would send it to him. And then a couple of days later, I'd write another script and send it to him.
I would keep getting these scripts. I would try. I was working on, at that point, Hawkman, I think. And and I would get, we would talk about this, and I would get a script, and wow, this is great. And then I would get another script, and it would say, all right, disregard the last script. This is the one you want to read. And it would it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we were just having a blast with it for the most part. We had no idea if anybody was going to like it, but for some reason it took over our imaginations, and we started playing around with it, and after a while, we started liking the idea so much that I thought, well, maybe we should really give it a shot. But the only options open for us was kind of going the self-published digital route. And maybe I had talked to Chip Mosier. I'd known Chip for years, and I had talked to him before about just distributing through ComiXology. And I said, look, if we do this, do you think you'd be interested in distributing? And he goes, shh, don't tell anybody, but we might be interested in publishing it. And I went, what? And he showed me this flyer that they had just literally put out the day before that had a listing of all the upcoming titles that they were looking at putting out. And but they also had a situation where they were technically, you're the publisher and they're still the distributor, but they give you some royalties, advance against royalties. And so there's different options that they had. So he assigned us an editor, Biz Stringer Horn, who I had never worked with before, but basically she's young and energetic and we're not. And so we figured it was a good idea to have somebody like that involved. And she's been great. We started sending her stuff, and it's right up her alley. She and her dad really used to bond over science fiction, and we just kept working on it. And finally we got it to a state where we sent off, where Biz basically called Chip and said, yeah, I think you guys really want to do this. And so they greenlit us, and Pat and I just took off flying. The hard part then was figuring out which of the 5 scripts to start with, because we liked all of them. And it's weird because in a lot of ways we rearranged them trying to make it so that we could introduce the characters a little more clearly up front. But the 3rd issue was actually the very first script that Pat and I worked on together. And that's the one that it's a standalone issue. It's sort of powerful, and it sets the stage for the whole story. So in a lot of ways, the first 3 issues are really kind of what get the series going. And so there we are. We sent it off, and every time they show it around over at Amazon, that we get more and more internal fans. So we hope that translated into people actually reading it in the outside real world. So that's probably over explaining it, but that's the kind of the meat and potatoes version of the story. It just was complex and weird. I mean, we just were having fun.
And that was, and I actually was going through old emails and stuff today for tax purposes, and just trying to figure out what my year's been like. And it's amazing to go back and see all the interaction that we were having back when we were just kind of kicking this idea around and developing concepts and developing characters. And I would do some character sketches, but then time would pass, and then we'd send more ideas, and then something we'd send more ideas, and yet we didn't have a home for it. It was just something we were kind of like doing with the hopes that it would turn into something. But it was wild to look back over the past year or actually longer and see this kind of strange development of this project that really, I think one of the things that was kind of amazing, and I think Chuck and I were texting each other the day before we debuted on ComiXology, just how weird it was after all this time and all these conversations and all the sketches and the ideas and the reformatting of like which issue goes where and all that kind of stuff, that it actually is coming out. It's actually going to be out there for people to read. For so long, it was just in our heads. It was just between us, and now it's actually kind of out there, which is kind of extraordinary, which is what we wanted. But it was kind of very strange after all this time to then say, you know what, tomorrow this enters the world. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah. We got kind of precious about it in a lot of ways, because everybody that we work with liked working on it. And so we kind of thought, well, yeah, this is kind of nice. Why don't we just keep doing this and entertaining our friends? But at some point you got to get it out there and see how the rest of the world takes it. So, but yeah, it's been almost, I think, 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think so. Since the very beginning, since the very early conversations about it. I mean, and really, you talked about, you and I pitching projects, and that goes all the way back to not long after we worked on the call together. There weren't any other projects for us to work together at Marvel or anything else like that. So we kicked around these ideas. I remember we were even going to approach Tokyo Pop with an idea. And I mean, we were just looking everywhere to try to put together something. And then there were big periods of time where, Chuck would be doing his thing, I'd be doing my thing, and would just kind of not necessarily lose touch, but it would just kind of like, life would kind of go on. And then, like Chuck said, I'd gotten to the point where I wanted to explore this before I got any older, this idea of a creator-owned project. And Chuck and I had all these ideas that we kicked around. And so, I thought it was time to give it another shot. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was really stricken with was, you're talking about how your editor bonded over the sci-fi genre, but this is like many projects in the sci-fi genre, it feels very familiar yet very different as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of the sci-fi influences that you guys brought into it. Like, what are your sci-fi projects that you're into?
You want to start that one?
Sure. I mean, for me, I mean, I think that for a project like Edgeworld, one of the first science fiction shows that will be mentioned the most is Firefly, which was a great series.
Yeah.
But beyond that, for me, I think, I read science fiction all the time when I was a kid, and Isaac Asimov and all that kind of stuff. But what really set its hooks in for me was the original Star Trek. I just love that show. Anytime it comes on, even now, if it comes on or I see it on TV, so I have to stop what I'm doing. Even though I know exactly.
In good company, yeah.
But I know at this point, I know all the episodes. I know what they're going to say, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I just love the show. So, I mean, you translate that into, and most people my age follow the same path. You go into, Star Wars. Star Wars comes out. I think I saw it 25 times in the theater. My brain just went like poof out the side of my head. I said, oh my God. So, I mean, those kinds of shows, Star Trek, Star Wars, the science fiction books that I was reading, those are the things that were the initial hooks that developed my interest in the genre.
Yeah. So, a lot of my influences are the same. Star Trek is absolutely at the top of my list. The original Star Trek, the original Kirk and Spock and McCoy. That dynamic is one that is embedded in my soul. I mean, I used to run home every day from school because they had it on at 3:00. I get out at 2:30 and I wanted to be home at 3:00 to watch the next episode. And like Pat, I got to the point where, 5 seconds in, I heard the first line or saw the first scene and I knew which episode it was. It was a little disturbing actually how interested I was in that show. But it was, after that, it was.
That's not disturbing, Chuck. You're amongst friends.
Exciting.
Yeah. And what I started to realize as I was kind of formulating this idea is that a lot of what Roddenberry was doing originally was kind of distilling down basic storytelling of interaction of characters and how disparate characters work together to solve problems and tell a story. And a lot of his background is in the Western. So you'll see Westerns that were his influence or things that he worked on, like The Lieutenant, where you have the hero, and then you have the old sheriff, and then you have the old doctor. And then there's of course, Gunsmoke is the classic, and we have our little nod to Gunsmoke. I think my favorite review from a friend so far was, yeah, I started reading your book and I thought, yeah, I get it, Gunsmoke in space, and then you kill what? Sorry, give away a spoiler there.
Oh my God.
So, but then then he says you blow up the concept, at the end of it, and that's sort of the way we've been approaching it. We're taking a lot of these old science fiction stories that we loved and sort of retelling them, but turning everything on its ear, or a Western story and turning it on its ear. A lot of it it's not just Westerns, it's influenced by history in general. The incoming dominant culture that displaces the culture that exists there in the world that it exists in at that point, and you're talking about everything from the East India Company to the slave traders that went to Africa and took people out of their homes and brought them to serve other people. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that that sort of runs through it. So it's a huge mix of stuff. I was a huge Ray Bradbury fan. I'm a huge Larry Niven's Known Space fan. I used to love the way that he would write stories that seemed completely disconnected, but if you looked at the tapestry, there were all of his stories kind of connected within the same kind of universe. So there are a lot of influences that kind of come into this thing, and fortunately, Pat and I have a lot of the same influences, a lot of the things that we're both interested in. So when I send him something, he'll get a call from him, and it's like, oh man, this was so cool. It reminded me of. So it's just a blast, It's like,
yeah, we do have common touchstones when it comes to approaching stuff like this, and I think that's obviously because we're close in age, and so we grew up on a lot of the same things, that you just described. And I think that was one of the fun things about, as much as I loved Star Trek, Star Wars, and a lot of the standard science fiction genre visuals, I liked the idea of this kind of the sci-fi Western genre, which is certainly, has a lot of great examples within itself. But when I thought about the project, I didn't immediately want to draw spaceships. But what I did like the idea of drawing weird aliens in this kind of worn, kind of beaten down town, and those kinds of things that combine science fiction pieces with Western pieces. I just love the visual possibilities of that, and especially considering how we set up the world, where it is, there's the Rift Gate, so basically the town is just a stop through. People are just kind of coming in, coming out. And so you get to draw all kinds of weird stuff just in the backgrounds, just on the street scenes. I mean, those things are taking me longer than just about anything else, because I'm trying to figure out, does this guy have 4 tentacles on his head? And does, just all these kind of weird little things going in the background. But it was that kind of combination of genres, the Western and the science fiction, that really piqued my interest, that really got me excited. Beyond just the science fiction thing, it was the combination of those two visuals that I was really excited about.
Yeah. And, and some of that influence goes, we, both of us had our brains explode when we saw Star Wars. And there is a big part of me that always wanted to know what the hell is Mos Eisley? What is with that space?
Right.
What this, all these aliens are in this bar. Where did they all come from? Why are they staying on this little desert world? So in a lot of ways that things sort of evolved from there. So as much as people are seeing Westerns in it, it's also all of our childhood science fiction influences too. So
yeah, that's really exciting that you bring up Star Trek as an influence, because I mean, a lot of people, I guess they don't realize that Roddenberry pitched Star Trek as kind of a sci-fi Western, where he explained it as, horses and starships.
Wagon train in space.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And then, a few years later, Star Wars blows up on that concept, basically. Right. So you get a lot of these great concepts in it that fit within that sci-fi Western mold. Mm-hmm. But something that really draws me to these stories is the take on morality, or the vision of the future. And I often say Roddenberry's vision of the future has kind of influenced me just deeply to my core and my belief system. And that's something we see a lot in sci-fi stories. And the Western twist on it gives that human feel, I think, to it. So I kind of wanted to see, where that vision of the future played into how you created the universe, I guess, in Edgeworld #1, and how it helped to shape the story.
Well, I think for me, I have I'm very similarly, I'm influenced by Roddenberry's sort of worldview, and that idea that we're all moving towards a better place, and that we'll all get along better. But then there are times where I feel, I have that sort of balance where I look at the world around me and I think, oh my God, it's not getting better, and it can't. There are just some people who are never going to get it, and so that, in a lot of ways, that led me to sort of what a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do with Edgeworld. So it was like really kind of the underside of Star Trek. It was like the places that you don't see, and the things that you don't hear about, and the stories that they didn't want to tell. Some of the things that I don't want to talk about it too much, because it's in like the second arc, but there's some stuff that Pat and I are working on that, it goes into some weird and disturbing places, but it has to do with how aliens would see each other, and what they would feel about each other, and how they would think about each other, and it also ties into sort of that historical thing that that we talked about. So as much as I'm influenced by the kind of the spirituality and the belief in a better world that Roddenberry put forth, sometimes it's hard to see that. So what Pat and I like to do is we like to create characters that have a moral core, but they're still working through a difficult world. Because as much as we're talking about a future like what Roddenberry had, we're trying to tell science fiction is really a vehicle for telling stories of the now. Ray Bradbury used to say that science fiction isn't a crystal ball, it's a mirror. And that's kind of how I usually look at it. Is like it's for telling. It's like it's what Rod Serling did with the Twilight Zone. He used to tell stories that were about the current contemporary problems that he was facing, but they were on an alien world, or they were in a strange bubble universe, or any number of things. So I think that's kind of where we're going with it. I think Pat and I sort of have more of a, I don't know if I want to call it a realistic view of the world, but we sort of see the duality of nature, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah.
To play with that.
That's why you're the
Yeah,
writer.
it's super interesting.
Well said.
Thank you, sir. Now draw that.
Right, exactly. I'll be back.
I mean, it's funny because I thought that, one of the main talking points that I kind of wanted to get into was when I was reading Edgeworld, I got this real definitive, like colonial discourse sense. Right? Like we're looking at Pala as a colonized, subjugated peoples. We've got a conflict between the military and the AI-driven magistrate, neither of which are local to Pala, right? They're all oppressors. They're oppressors.
Right.
So I mean, reading that discourse, and I live in Hawaii, which is an illegally annexed property, illegally acquired state. So I'm pretty sensitive to these colonial issues, and that was the major touchstone for me pushing through the book that really got me wanting to see, like, where are you going with this? What are your thoughts? Like, is there a current parallel that you're drawing on, or are you more drawing on kind of a general historical sense? Because we all know people cry it all the time. Comics aren't political, but they are.
Yeah. Well, probably the weirdest thing for me and Pat is that we've been working on this for so long that a lot of the stuff that we did is winding up being very contemporary at this particular time. Like,
right.
Like just the opening couple of pages when Killian walks in out of the sand and he's wearing a mask. It's like there's this whole thing about you can't go outside or you'll get eaten. And it's like who knows what's going to happen because it's awful out there. So there's all of this stuff that we were looking at it from a historical standpoint, very much like what you're talking about. It is a colonialized world. You'll see even more of that in the coming issues. There are rules that are set in place to try to keep the Palans feeling like they are involved in the situation, and Killian tries to use those as much as he can to keep peace. For people who haven't read the first issue yet, I don't want to spoil it, but Killian, he's pretty much always looking for deputies. And one of the rules that he has to deal with is that he has to have deputies who are local. They have to be of the indigenous species. And so in the next few issues, he's looking for people that can work with him. And, and he has a hard time finding people. So, because they recognize that they are the oppressed people and they don't want to work for, because there were situations like that, where Native Americans were asked to help the cavalry, and then they were considered to be traitors to their own nation. So, there's just a lot of historical parallels to this, but they also, I guess, history repeats itself. So there's a lot of stuff that winds up coming up in contemporary times that make it seem to echo. I haven't seen it, but Pat said he saw somebody drew a comparison to the Black Lives Matter movement in the first issue. And I thought, wow, that's deep. That's seeing something that definitely was not put in there, but it was, but it when you're talking about people who are suffering under an oppressive situation, like you said, in Hawaii, you tend to be more sensitive to it. And that's probably why you picked up on it a lot more. So I think people who are sensitive to what it is that we're writing about historically, they're seeing the parallels contemporaneously. So,
and I think the great thing is too that, and that's why I think we're excited about the project, and I think why we think that I think this is going to have legs. I think people are going to get involved in it precisely because what you said. You're from Hawaii, so you saw a connection here where there are historical parallels. You can draw all kinds because the story is so complicated. It's got a lot of different layers to it. We want to have something that people can connect with, both from just a basic story content, character content, action content, but also different layers of what this means societally for both the Palins within our world, but how it relates to what's going on around us right now. But it's that kind of multi-layered story that I think that drives both us in developing this thing, but also I think will drive people's interest in the book, just because there are so many different things. You can read the first issue and enjoy it as a science fiction adventure story and a mystery, and then you could also then start to, and you'll see more of it in the subsequent issues. That you can delve into the different societal relationships between the Palins and the UA and the military, and so that's all there for people to get something out of. There is, this sounds corny, but there's something for everybody in this project. So and it works on all kinds of different levels, and I think that's why and maybe that was the benefit of having developed this for so long. It was maybe if the situation was, hey, we've got this idea, we have some place that wants to publish it, we got a couple of months or a few weeks or whatever to put this together and get this thing out. Maybe it isn't quite as layered at that point, but we've been playing with this for so long, and Chuck's been developing all these different ideas and layers and everything. I think what we have now is the culmination of all that time and all that thought, and what happens when we do this, and how about this, and what these characters relate to each other. So I think there really is a ton of layers in this project that will resonate with pretty much everybody.
I really just think that, I'm glad that you brought up that there is something for everybody, because I honestly did read it at first as just kind of this sci-fi Western adventure. And I really started to latch onto things, and especially multiple readings, you start to see those levels of nuance into it. And I think I immediately connected with Killian, this main character. And I wanted to see if maybe y'all could, flesh out the motivations and what helped flesh this character out, and, make it a main character that we're going to see going forward.
Well, I think a big part of it, and this is where I have to give Biz credit for her influence on a lot of this, because originally Pat and I were thinking of it as individual stories, kind of one and done shots that would be just kind of like potent Twilight Zone-esque or old original Star Trek type stories with recurring characters. But Biz wanted to know more about the universe and the world and the people and the way that they related to each other, and so we got much deeper into Killian's character. And it's funny because you see all of this, the kind of the jokes online about Mary Sue's, and how they'll write the Star Trek stories that are it's basically them in thin disguise, but in some ways Killian is kind of me and Pat in thin disguise. We're at that stage where we've got this past behind us, and we've done a bunch of stuff, and now we're kind of mentoring other people and helping them to move forward into their lives and careers, and we're wondering if there's one last great adventure for us. But at the same time, our main goal in life is, he's got a daughter, I've got two stepdaughters, two former stepdaughters and a son, and you want to see them develop into wonderful human beings, and so you realize that your life is really centered more around who they are and what they're going to become. And so a lot of Killian is kind of based on that. He's this guy who, he had other plans in his life. He didn't expect to be the sheriff on this dirtball little world. And yet he is. But what we find as the story goes on is that he's there for a reason. It just didn't just happen to him. He chose this position to be there. And in a lot of ways, it was because he kind of wanted to give back to this world that he had a hand in. I don't want to see. It's hard to talk about this stuff without spoiling issues that are coming up. But have I answered your question?
I think so. If I could maybe transfer this over to Patrick a little more, how difficult is it to kind of take in all of these things and channel it into this artistic vision that you've kind of delivered, especially in the first issue?
It goes to, it begins with not only the idea that Chuck and I developed over the course of the last year to 2 years. So even while I'm on other projects, Chuck and I have been talking about this. So the wheel's visually already turning. So as we talk about it, you start to develop an idea of what you think the visuals of the world are going to be. And because of the sci-fi Western genre, I'm already kind of locked into a specific kind of direction. So I'm looking at not only reference from the Old West and old Western towns, but also what I wanted the technology to look like. I wanted to be a little bit more weathered. I started pulling pictures of old locomotive trains and all the little kind of like, nuts and bolts that were kind of all over the place on those things. So just trying to, but also marrying it up with what would be more standard science fiction technology visuals in terms of the spaceships and stuff. And that was, so all those things start to kind of like start working in your brain as the more you talk about it. You start pulling things off of, thank goodness for Google image search. So I'm pulling in like, I have all this idea. So I would go and I would print them out, and all over my desk are like printouts of like just random stuff. It's just like, like things from the Old West but just things I wanted to cobble together. So really what I was looking for is a way to do something that obviously fit into the science fiction Western genre, but also was something that I could look at and say, that was mine. I made these choices about how to establish interiors, how to establish the streets, what people wear. So all of that is kind of rolling around in my brain. And then of course the scripts start coming in. And I think because Chuck is also an artist, it makes my job easier because he writes visually. That's not always the case with a writer, but he writes in a way that I understand. When I get the script, I get it. I understand what he wants. I understand where the characters are going. I understand how all that works. So that's another jumping off point. That's, so you have all of this in the background that you've developed to give you a visual structure. And then the scripts come in and the characters start living, and then you're allowed to then play within the structure you've created based on the scripts and the characters and that kind of stuff. So it was just a cobbling together of a whole bunch of different things that got me to this point.
And it's always, not to take away from Pat's description in any way, but it's awesome when I send off something and I get back something that I never expected. It's like Killian, the original. In my head, originally he's sort of the typical clean-shaven hero guy, and then Pat sent back this drawing with this guy with this full beard, and my first thought was no. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, you know what, this is actually great. It's perfect. Or I'll have a character in the background that Shay will be speaking to. And she'll call the character, I don't know, Gink or something like that. And then and then Pat will send me back this drawing, and I'll look at it and I'll go, man, that's such a great looking character. But it's not a Gink. It's a Kipo. It's a Chemo. And then I'll change the name because his visuals have gone in a completely different direction than I expected. And I just generally, unless I have something specific in mind, I just generally say, there's an alien in the background. Pat just goes crazy. I think I'd tell him, here's a street scene, and I'll, because I was an artist and I had to draw so much of this stuff, I'll try to give him an out, and I'll say, you can show this from like a low 3/4 angle, so you can only see a couple of people on the street, and then he'll send it back, and there's like 100 aliens in the street, and they all look different, and they all look part of the world. And so he just goes over and above anything that I ever expected when I give him these scripts or these ideas. And I think it's just because we just feed off of each other, he likes what he's reading. I love what I'm seeing, and we just keep trying to top each other.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And since we're talking about kind of that design and execution, I want to see if we could maybe bring in what the colorist and letter and designer Lee Laufridge and Jody Wynn kind of brought to the table, especially Jody being credited as designer, kind of what that influence was to help shape this world.
Do you want to talk about that? I can talk about it.
Okay, you can do that. You can talk about Jody. I'll talk about Lee.
Okay. Jody was great. Because I sent her the script and Pat's first pages, and I said, I'm looking for something different. I don't know if I want all uppercase lettering. I kind of want to try some different things. So she sent me back a page, sent both of us back a page to look at that had like 10 different lettering samples on it. And she and she picked, she had listed out which ones she thought were her favorites, and said, well, what would you prefer? She said, because one of the things with me is, since I've been out of comics for so long, when I came back to comics and started reading the all uppercase lettering, it always felt like people were shouting at each other. So I was really into the trying upper and lower case, and she agreed that when she tried it, she liked that best, but she still sent me a bunch of, potential uppercase samples in case I changed my mind. So she went through and these are all different fonts and all different styles and different spacing and different lettering. And she tried a whole bunch of different balloons and that was just the beginning of it. Then she started designing the covers, and she started sending us some basic breakdowns, and here's Pat, here's how you do the a very simple design for the artwork, because we were trying to make it look good in the Amazon carousel, and she came up with a logo, and we were very careful to try to keep it so that it looks good at a very reduced size, and all I would have to do was mention it to her, and she just ran with it. She just took care of all of that stuff. So she was way beyond just a letterer for me and Pat. She was, absolutely the designer. Then she came up with the visual style for the cover, for the interior cover, for the interior page material. There's I don't think this is going to spoil anything, but we have this. There's a plot point in an episode in an issue coming up where it plays a bottle of alcohol plays prominently in the story, and she designed the logo for the bottle, and we liked the logo so much that we started talking about, well, maybe we should have like an interior ad, like an alcohol ad for this particular brand of alcohol, and so it's the same kind of thing, is that we all wind up feeding off of each other. We all see something that the other person is doing and just get more excited about it, and it's the same with Biz and because I'll absolutely lump her in as part of the gang of five here. Absolutely. When she and I will spend hours on the phone. She'll ask me questions about the world and the universe, and sometimes they were things that I hadn't even thought to ask. Like what's the history of the characters, and why does Killian use this word as opposed to that word? Because there were times when I would use like historical references and I would use like verbiage from like older English versions of a word, and she wanted to know why I was using that particular word, and did it mean something, and could we find a way to make it contemporary? And she would she would make me watch out for things like I would tend to often genderize something as male, just because I'm a man and I think that way all the time. And she'd say, well, is there any reason that this couldn't be a woman? And no reason at all why that couldn't be a woman. Let's go that way too. So she can talk to me about things that, I'm almost a 60-year-old guy now, and I'm like Pat said, we've done our things, and we've been, we've tried our stuff, but there are times when I'm not fully connected with how, even my 17-year-old son thinks. So it helps to have somebody like in Biz's age range where she can kind of point out to me, hey, the world has changed a little since you were a kid. You might want to think this way instead of that way. So, but it's also just like the science fiction side of it. She challenges me on that. She wanted it to make sure that, because she knew that Pat and I were excited about all aspects of the science fiction. So she wanted to make sure the science fiction stayed a big part of it, that it didn't just stay in the Western tropes, that we thought about the universe and the world and how it actually worked and how it fit within the greater the greater universe, and
because that was something that happened early on, is that we really did kind of start gravitating toward the Western idea, as more Western than Western science fiction, and that was a direction that that I was glad that she kind of steered us back a little bit, because we did kind of head in a specific direction away from the science fiction stuff, which I think would have been to detriment of the book.
Yeah, I agree. So you want to talk about Lee?
Sure. So I mean, we were very fortunate to get Lee on the project. I had not worked with him before, but I was aware of his stuff. Super talented guy. And it was, I did have, it was interesting because in other projects that I worked on over the course of my career, an editor puts this together, the penciler, the inker, the colorist, and that. So they're kind of the general idea of what they want. And in this particular situation, I really did have a specific idea of what I wanted the colors to look like, what I thought the colors should, what kind of feel the colors should give the project. So, and that was not always an easy thing to get, but Lee was able to get it pretty quickly. He understood what I was talking about. He's able to give this kind of desaturated, washed out kind of feel to a lot of the characters and a lot of the scenes. He's aware of changing the exterior scenes to be a little bit more desaturated. Then you would move into, let's say, the moonlight, where it becomes a little bit more saturated. He was able to understand what I was looking for very quickly, and he's actually able to. I don't know how he does it, but he's actually able to. He's able to almost, if you look at the colors, there's almost kind of a watercolor kind of a texture to it. I have no idea how he's doing that, but it looks amazing. I mean, it's just, and it fits perfectly with the world that we're creating. So, I mean, he fit in really well. He understands what we were doing. It was a great back and forth in establishing what the look of the characters would be. And he's also aware of the storytelling too. There's a scene where a character in the first issue is Harley's supposed to notice a sandwich on the desk of the doctor in this room. Now, I didn't mention it to Lee as far as, okay, you know, we kind of, you know, it's in the background, it's very subtle, but, you know, it is something that a reader, that they would think entertaining, that this character is kind of obsessed with this sandwich kind of thing. He did that on his own. When I saw the colors, he brightened that up just a little bit, so it popped out. So you knew that even though an interaction was happening in the panel in the foreground, in the background, this extra little bit was happening, and he picked that up from the script. So, so I mean, he's just done a really fabulous job in the overall. Some of the exterior shots of the town, the exterior shots of the magistrate's office and Doc's office, this kind of washed out look, it's just been brilliant. I mean, it's just really done a great job.
That's really cool. I'll I know Cody has another question, but that's kind of why I like to dig into those, because like that's ultimately when you dig into a book like this, it's so moody and there's so many different world building elements that kind of put you into the world, and it's such an expansive project. It's great to hear those little levels of detail like the sandwich that you really wouldn't get, you know, just as a casual reader or something, but that's really what makes this stuff pop.
So yeah, something that keeps kind of coming up and then kind of disappearing and fading off into the background is, you know, Pat, you guys are both industry veterans. Pat, you've been working nonstop through, most recently on Hawk World with Robert Venditti.
Right. I'm very tired.
Chuck, you took a long hiatus, completely understandable given everything that was going on and circulating and blah, 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 all that crap. But with Pat staying with it and you taking the hiatus, is there anything that, Pat, you were able to bring to the table as far as, you know, comics is a living medium. It's always changing. It's always evolving. That maybe Chuck, you had missed. And is there anything from television work, like you've been, you know, executive producing on She-Ra and show running, that you brought into the comics world to kind of create, I don't know, a mashup genre of storytelling?
You got it.
Well, yeah, the first thing that popped into my head was that in a project like this that really generates from the two of us is so different from anything that I've worked on. I have had projects where I was very fortunate to work with a lot of really great writers, some of whom were great to work with, lots of back and forth. I had a lot of input kind of thing, but it was still, I mean, the majority of almost my entire career has been working for Marvel and DC. I worked for Disney Publishing for a little while, but they were all company characters. I mean, and so they pre-existed, they had a history. And like I said, some writers were very nice about a back and forth and the storytelling and that kind of thing. So from a comic book illustration standpoint, it's hard to say that the years that I have been putting in working on everything from Spider-Man to, you know, Hawkman, they influenced Edgeworld in the fact that I'm hoping that I have become better at my craft over the course of those years. But beyond that, what informs this project is more internal, I think, between the two of us and what we wanted to do, and the idea that it really was our world that we get to play with and kind of build from the ground up. I mean, I was on a project called Rough Riders for Aftershock Comics, and that was a wonderful experience, but I was brought in after the project was created. So this is the first time where I've been involved from the ground up. My time in comics and over the years, I think I've developed a certain ability to tell a visual story, a sequential story. It's one of the things I enjoy the most is the storytelling part of it. It's one of the things I enjoy the most about any project, but specifically about this project is the acting of the characters. When I talk to students, I say you have to act the characters. You really have to understand what they feel. That's the only way you're going to get the emotions across on the page. You have to understand it. You have to act it. So those kinds of things, I think, are things that I've learned, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully I've gotten better at over the course of the years that I can bring to Edgeworld. But in terms of visually telling the story of Edgeworld, that has become a very internal process, and it's just kind of something that Chuck and I have to kind of develop as we go along.
Yeah. From my point of view, and I mean, what Pat touches on actually is one of the reasons why I love working with him, because there's even back when we did the call together, he was just clearly thinking about story in every panel. He was thinking about the characters and the relationships and the acting and what each person was thinking. There's a great scene in the first issue. I think it's the first issue. I hope I'm not spoiling something else.
I'll scream real loud if you are.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for watching out for me. There's the scene where Maggie comes up and is looking for her husband, for Raoul. He didn't come home that night. Is that in the first issue? Is that okay? Good. All right.
It is.
But it's just, it's not really actually spoiling anything, but she's talking to Killian, and Pat drew her, and she's just kind of like looking around nervously. You know, she's not really focused on what Killian is saying to her. She's kind of got her own ideas in her head about what might have happened, and she's already pretty sure it may have been something bad, but she doesn't know. And, you know, it's like typical worried wife stuff. And I didn't tell him to draw that. It's just stuff that he put in and made me so happy.
That was one of my favorite scenes. It's a very quiet scene, but I enjoyed it so much because of just what Chuck was saying, is that you had to act her character. So she's there, she's worried. So her hands are up, her hands are in front of her because she's concerned. As they're talking, and when Killian talks about the sandstorm, and he's probably out there, he's probably fine. I wanted to make sure that she didn't look at him. She looked off into the distance, thinking about where her husband might be. Those are the kind of things that I just enjoy so much working as a comics artist, but working on a script from Chuck, because he allows those scenes to exist. That doesn't always happen. So it's fun.
And for me, that's one of those things that like you were talking earlier about how you feel like there are layers. Those are the kinds of extra layers that come into it for me that you may not notice at first, but you feel it when you're reading it. You kind of subtly pick up on what's happening, and you get that little bit of anxiety about it, which is what we want. You know, that's a particular point in the story where where we don't really know what's going on. We don't really know if something bad is happening or not. And so you kind of want to build that little bit of suspense and unease about what's going on. But what's interesting, I mean, you were talking about the fact that I had my hiatus from comics. I haven't even been in a comic shop, I think, in 10 years. But what happened basically is that what I was doing, people love to tease me that I was the most hated man in comics. I hear it a lot, but the things that didn't work for the medium for comics turned out to work really, really well for television and for animation. So I took the knowledge that I had gained about storytelling, or what I believed to be good storytelling, because even though people were telling me that, often how much they hated my writing, and yes, they did tell me that to my face and at conventions. I had to get used to it. But I still believed in what I had learned. I still believed in, Joseph Campbell and storytelling approaches that I had learned over the years, story engineering. And so I took that and went back into the animation business, and now I'm a producer, and it's helped. Everything that I learned and everything that I did there, even though I haven't been doing much writing, has helped me as far as telling stories, telling visual stories, particularly on something like She-Ra, where you're looking for the emotional connection with an audience as much as you can possibly find it. And the more of an emotional connection you make, the deeper the involvement that you get with your fan base and with the people that like what you're doing. But that's not something that is always a comfortable place to go for most comics fans. So when Pat and I got together, it was kind of like he had kind of come to a similar place, I think, in a lot of ways, that I had from being out of the business, that he knew what he was doing was great, and he knew that you did, come on, and that what he wanted to do more of was valid and worthwhile. So we got together so that he could do more of that, and because I encourage him to do more of that, and I love it when he does more of that. And so because what he does is what I look for in a professional artist when I'm looking for a storyboard artist in Los Angeles. I want somebody who can draw those emotional, quiet moments. Anybody can draw an action scene. Anybody can, watch a Vin Diesel movie and kind of imitate what they see on the screen in drawing form. But there's not a lot of people that can draw Maggie, nervously asking about her husband. And that kind of stuff is just beautiful and so emotionally engaging for an audience. And that's my whole thing. So working with Pat is like this real dream, because I get to write, and I get to, and having been out of comics for a long time, I've continued to learn about story and structure and how things go. And so one of the things that Pat and I really wanted to do was to tell individual stories, 1 or 2 page issues at the most. We're not going to have, 10-page arcs that don't end or that cross over into, other books or anything else like that. This is, Biz and Chip helped encourage us to think about it as a grander kind of epic story overall. So there's a lot to the world and a lot to the universe, but we're always going to focus on these characters and on these stories and how they relate to each other, and try and shock and surprise the audience and make them laugh and make them cry. That's our whole goal. So we had kind of come to the same place, and now we're just feeding off of each other, and we hope we can continue doing it for forever. I mean, I could do this with Pat for, I hope people, yeah. I hope people buy it.
All of that really does show on the page, like all of that experience, all of that synergy between you and everyone on the team. Like, it really does come through in a book that is far better than we probably deserve, honestly. Like, this is a very sharp, very contemporary, Pat, I think it's the best work I've seen from you in your entire career.
Yeah.
You feel happy with it. Like, it feels, you can feel that happiness. And Chuck, I've talked to you about that before, where the happiness, like, you can see it in your work, and I love that. So I know we've kept you guys a pretty long time. I do want to close out with our normal. What have you been reading or watching, and what are you looking forward to sometime in the near future?
What have I been reading? At the moment, I'm a kind of a mystery guy. At the moment, I'm working my way back through some Dick Francis books, and I just got another author who is kind of surprising me. I think his name is Ian Rankin. Some of it is because I've been wanting to. There's a bit. There's a mystery side to what we do with Edgeworld. There's where a lot of the science fiction elements have a mystery to them that doesn't wind up getting discovered or figured out until the story moves along. And so I'm relearning kind of mystery stuff. So I'm spending a lot of time reading books like that. As far as television, not long after I started Edgeworld, somebody said, "Oh, you got to check out Longmire," and I thought, "Oh, I don't know if I want to watch a cowboy, contemporary cowboy thing, But I did. I checked it out and I liked it. I really enjoyed it and binge watched it for a few weeks, and now it's over and I don't get any more. So, so I think those are the main things for me.
Well, what I've been reading is, I actually recently I read a book that I recommended it to Chuck, and it really fit into the book that it's called The Sisters Brothers, which was just an absolute. Oh, he's got it right there.
I've been reading it. Look, I have a bookmark. That's the other one I've been reading.
There you go. So that was absolutely. I love the book, and it really just kind of, I read it. Obviously, there is a connection. It's not a science fiction book. It's a Western, but it's a connection. The characters are so unique and so odd, and just really kind of beautifully fits into kind of where my head is at right now. I think where Chuck's, so I recommend it to him. Actually, the funny thing is, the other thing I'm reading right now that's non-comics related was my daughter actually has her history class is doing American history, and they were talking about the Civil War. I actually pulled this out and started reading it again. I got the complete New York Times Civil War volume. It's a book that reproduces every article written in the New York Times about the Civil War from the beginning of the war to the end of the war.
Wow.
So I had read some. It's a huge book. I hadn't gotten through all of it, but it's amazing. So she, we're learning about this. Oh my God! So I pulled that book out, and I've been kind of rereading some of those things. It's crazy. I mean, it's just amazing how different things were then, and how the same they are. I mean, just Anyway, so that I'm also comic book wise. I've been reading when I can get my hands on it. I like Outcast. Kirkman Azekata. I mean, that's a fantastic book. And in terms of, and you asked, obviously, what am I looking forward to? And obviously, I'd be an idiot not to say more Edgeworld. There you go. It just serves it right up. I have to say it. So there you go.
Me too. I got to say.
There you go.
Well, we try not to make it too hard on you guys. We really appreciate you guys joining us. Edgeworld #1 is up on ComiXology right now. Shout out to Pam at Superfan for helping hook this up. We love the folks at Superfan. They're great. Any parting shots? Any final words?
No, it's been fun. I appreciate you guys having us on and getting a chance to talk about this. It's like I said, it's been a crazy process. 2 years to get to this point. The book is finally out there. People are responding really positively to it. We've been really happy with how the response has been going so far. Getting a chance to talk about the book is always a pleasure, and anything we can do to kind of raise awareness that we're out there, and I think it's something that the people would enjoy and they should pick up. We're happy to do.
Yeah. Thanks, and thanks so much for having us. Thanks for giving us so much time. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It was our pleasure. I'm Cody. This is Nick. The website is www.comic-watch.com. We've been here with Pat and Chuck. Go check out Edgeworld #1 and check out the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and every other platform you can find podcasts. Until next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.